evolve our stream to be better every time. It will be nonstop. Yeah, they should have that as a hard body song, actually. I should add that. So, Kyle, why don't you talk for a little bit? And I'm watching the chat. So, when y'all start coming in, we can hear. Oh, wow. Wait, I'm. Oh, oh, yeah. Well, I don't even know if I have your microphone on this part. So, that's fun. Kyle, Mike.
Wow. So now I
Okay.
got to
Okay.
hear about all my exercise talk.
I think they heard you through, other means. Hello, Project Pinball Charity. Thanks
Yo.
for joining us today. We still need to talk. We want to do a raffle on our show one day to give someone a raffle ticket for a new inbox Stern game, but we'll get to that soon. Oh, we got Electric Bed Arcade. Hey,
Yo.
guys. I saw that you're opening up soon. Congratulations. Stay safe out there.
All the hard work you guys have been doing to get the place in line for the opening. It's awesome.
Yeah, good luck to all arcade owners and operators out there. It's been quite the intense few months, but hopefully we will adapt and overcome. So, Kyle, are you ready to do this?
I guess so. Ready or
I,
I'll
I
jump
don't
in.
have roller games music today, but it's okay. Today we are working on flippers, so let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to PinTech Live, episode 6. Where, as you can see, Kyle's already got his roller games lifted up, and we're going to be working on his flipper system. He kind of had some mismatched flippers, so we're going to change out those bats and do stuff like that. My name is Emoto. I am the operator here. And look at Kyle. Kyle's playing Pinball Operation right now, but he's your host. So, Kyle, how's it going and what are we doing today?
I'm gonna bend over so this camera can see me. We're going we're
Oh,
going to
God.
rehab some flippers. When I got this game, we didn't realize that we were gonna do like a really cool tech stream with it, so I kind of just started doing the basics to figure out how much it actually worked. And I'd rebuilt the flippers, but I only had 2 white flipper bats, so I left a yellow one in there. And I think what today we'll go over the components of the flipper, and it's basically a flipper rebuild. We have to take it apart almost all the way, anyways, and talk about some best practices and updates you can do to these flippers to make them a little more modern, and the do's and don'ts, and the pluses and minuses. So, yeah.
Awesome. Kyle, where is your microphone right now? Because you are really lower than usual. And
Lower
I
than
have you,
usual. Can you boost my levels?
you're boosted all the way, buddy.
I'm boosted. Okay,
Oh.
well, it's really in the same place it's always been. So,
Well, just to let everyone know, this is the last week we'll have extreme audio issues. Cross. Oh God, where's wood to knock on? Um, but we're upgrading our gear, so next week we should be
better.
awesome, better.
We are
Thank you.
constantly updating, and it's fun to get new equipment. So we'll be learning. As you can see on the upper right camera, I have a camera inside the game, so we can get the ultimate view of what's going on in here. I will try to make my voice louder so it does not seem quiet at all. So what we're going to do here is my right flipper has a yellow flipper bat in it. And I have a nice shiny new white one here that we can put in.
Yay! I usually love mismatched colors, but that was just driving me nuts. I was like, how does Kyle have 2 different colored flipper bats going on right now?
It was pretty awful. So let me grab some old parts I have down here in the bottom of the cabinet. This is an original System 11 flipper pawl. This would not be on here. This little link right here, that is where the an extension spring would hang. So let's just look at this because this is kind of important. The original pawls are going to have a...
Hey, Kyle, stop right there for a second. I'm getting some stuff on the stream from our moderators. Can you just flip your snowball mic back to the setting you had it before?
Yeah,
I think
try that.
whatever you changed it to is just making it all whack. Oh, I just saw it pop. All right, give me a little chatter. Give me some Kyle chatter. How's that sound, everyone?
Is it better?
Is it better? Oh, yes. Dan Forden did do the toasty on Mortal Kombat and a lot of other really cool stuff. And we have an awesome Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles update to give you at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. Kyle, say more things. I'm the one talking.
This is my voice. We're working on flippers. Flippers are important and really cool. And we need good flippers. And if you don't, pinball kind of sucks.
You need flippers.
Anything better?
Anyone in the chat? No? Says they're still really low. I don't understand. Let's see. I'm boosting you up. You're boosting.
Here, you know what? Let me do something really quick, and I can get the microphone like 2 feet closer. 1 second.
What has changed? Keep talking as you do this.
Okay, I'm talking. I'm kind of in position now. I'm bringing a box that we can put inside the game that the microphone can sit on. Give me a second here.
Oh.
Let me turn the box so I can still access these old parts I want to show.
Let's see.
Get them all to the front. Still talking. The microphone's kind of coming to where it's going to live now. How about this? Any better? Is it?
Keep talking.
It's a lot closer to me now. Flippers are fun. We got to make them better. I'm running out of flipper things to say. Anything?
Anyone? A little bit better. It's a little better. Just a little. We want more than a little.
Maybe I need to change my voice or something.
We got a much better from Crystal, so now I don't know who to trust.
I know that this is not likely, but are we using the correct microphone as the input onto OBS?
Yes.
Okay, I figured. Just checking.
Well, it's labeled Kyle's mic, and it's moving up and down when you talk. Okay.
But is the input device the snowball, or is it my laptop?
It's should be the snowball.
It should be.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Everyone says it was perfect for a second. Wait, is it not perfect now? It was good for a second. There's a head explosion emojis going off.
Is that good or bad?
No, it's bad now. You have to keep talking, Kyle.
Okay.
Maybe I can listen.
Yeah, see if you can listen. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We've got some super cool clip-on microphones. It's going to be like we're on TV or something. We're going to be all super professional. You're going to be able to hear everything I'm saying, hopefully better than you are now. Now I'm getting all nervous because I have to act instead of do. Oh no.
It says now it sucks again. I didn't even touch it at that point. Wait. Oh wow, it just reset. How? How now?
Maybe because you looked at the microphone properties or something?
Alright, how's that?
Yeah, flippers are cool. Sorry about the tech difficulties.
He's in the red. Yeah, you guys like that? He's super red on mine, but if that works, let's do it. Hi, Lori. Welcome again.
Hey, everybody.
50-50. Yeah, technology is 50-50. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, you know.
Guys.
But it's time to get rid of the cobbled together setup, and we're finally getting everything in place to have great stuff. So, shall we continue? Are we getting thumbs up or more head exploding and crying?
I think we're getting thumbs up, right? Rob, does it sound good? Too loud? Oh my gosh. You guys are killing me. Or we're killing you. I don't know. Is mutual killing going on? Kyle, keep talking.
I don't want to kill anybody. That's terrible.
Oh yeah, we're not killing anyone. We're just killing time.
Yeah, killing time. Spending time watching us deal with tech difficulties.
Ooh, we're getting some perfects.
Yay.
Let's say, Kyle, you sound beautiful today.
Don't lie. Or don't flatter me at all. No ego needed.
I know.
Okay. So.
Okay, great.
Let's get back to flipper stuff. We've got two different kinds of flipper pawls here, and the pawl is the part that holds the flipper bat. You've got a flipper pawl. You have the flipper link, which is the part that connects to the plunger, which is the part that's magnetized and makes all the fun stuff happen. This is a more modern, updated WPC era kind of flipper pawl. It uses a some swaged in piece of hardware to make this a one tool operation. If you compare that to a System 11 era older flipper pawl, you have a nut on one side and an Allen head screw on the other side, and you will need two tools to remove these things. I have a one tool setup. I do switch these to use extension springs, and we will go in deeper into the swap between extension springs and compression springs later in the show once we get to that point. This is the compression spring here. It kind of looks like a Christmas tree.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why we change them and what you need to do and be aware of when you change them. So to get the flipper bat out, which is what I'm going to start with, what I'm going to do is carefully, again, this is a modified system. If this was a stock roller games, it would have a compression spring here. I'm going to remove the extension spring or the return spring from the flipper pawl. You need a 3/8 inch wrench here to loosen this nut to be able to get the flipper out.
Okay.
So I'm going to get my 3/8 inch open end wrench here. Be careful. I have destroyed my thumbs many times by slipping and slamming my thumb up against this plate, and it hurts and you swear a lot.
Oh no.
So be careful. Use best practices. Use your brain. I'm going to turn it to the left. These are very tight. They need to be tight to grip the flipper shaft. So we'll turn this thing out. We'll get it kind of loosey-goosey. And again, if we were just going to be replacing the flipper bat, this is kind of where we would stop. What I can do now, go to the top of the game, grab the flipper bat, twist it loose. I like to hold the pawl here because if you start twisting the flipper bat, it still wants to rotate. You can hold this thing tight and pull it out.
Oh, okay, and you're just pulling the entire thing.
Yeah, now we have our flipper bat out.
That was like a magic trick. Because you have
yeah,
your hand on the top, okay, and then you're pulling down and then you're lifting up on the flipper bat.
Yeah, but give it a good, hold the linkage here and it's easier to twist the flipper out and let it rotate its way out of these tight little jaws.
Nice. Oh no, Rob Alman on Facebook says he bleeds every game. He bleeds on every game he works on.
If you don't, you're doing it wrong.
Everywhere. We're going to start cloning lots of Robs when we find that blood sample.
So if all we wanted to do was change the flipper bat, that would make for a really, really short and boring episode, and we'd be like, thanks for listening to us, test our mics, we'll see you later. Let's talk about the rest of the flipper now. To get this thing apart more, what we're going to want to do is use a 5/32 Allen wrench. I've got two flavors here. The T-handle allows you to exert a lot more torque, but I do kind of like these straight guys. Sometimes this is too wide to be able to turn in certain applications.
Nice.
So what this is for is to loosen and remove the coil stop screws, which are these guys back here. I'm going to do that now. Get 1 and 2. These do have lock washers underneath them, so don't drop them. If you ordered a new flipper rebuild kit, it would come with nice new hardware. I opted to use the old stuff.
Oh, yes. So you're not actually doing a flipper rebuild right now, right? You're just...
We're going to go over all of the parts of the flipper. Like I said, I have rebuilt the flippers on this game already. But we're going to take it apart and essentially do a flipper rebuild minus removing the old parts.
Nice.
So now we can
There's a
remove...
flipper rebuild kit you can get on our site.
Yeah, I've actually got one here, and I can show you all the new parts too.
Oh yeah.
The coil stop comes out from the back, and then that will free the coil. And once we remove the coil, the flipper crank assembly, the plunger link and pawl, will come out. I can set that up here.
Nice.
So now we've got the solenoid hanging here. One thing to keep in mind, I'll just give a pro tip right now. There was a service bulletin at some point where Williams they installed their solenoids like this for a long time with the diode end of the coil against the coil stop. And a big complaint over the years was the flipper coil diodes would break and cause all sorts of havoc and annoyances, and it was a pain in the butt. And they realized that simply turning the solenoid around and getting the diode side away from the coil stop side, that diode breakages occurred a whole lot less often than they used to. So it's a best practice to flip these things around if you have the wire length. Again, if it's in your home, is it the biggest deal in the world? No, because if it breaks, you can fix it. But when the game's earning you money, you don't want it down, ever. So it's a best practice. If you're operating the game, turn those things around. It's easy.
Nice. Foosbar on Twitch asked, is there a significance to the color wrap of the coils?
There very much so is. I should know this off the top of my head, but look it up in your manual. A lot of the manuals will show. This uses the 11630s, which I think they're the most powerful coil that Williams made, but I think the 11629 was just a little bit hotter than this one. Steve Ritchie games always use the most powerful coil that Williams had. It's just kind of like his signature. I think the green or the blue coils are the weakest ones. I don't want to give out bad information, but there absolutely is.
Oh, what about, was there a coil sleeve in there? Ben Gassaway brought that up. I didn't really see it either.
The coil sleeve is in the coil. The coil sleeve's in there kind of tight. This is an old coil, and it is in there kind of tight, meaning that this coil's probably, it's kind of melted together a little bit. It's probably a good candidate for a swap out at some point. But
yeah,
again,
it looks old.
This game is a home game, and I will keep it.
I saw the sleeve.
Yeah, I could kind of pop it out. I actually have a special tool for this, and this is something I cannot wait to get made and sell to all of you. It's just a machined down piece of steel stock that just so happens to fit the inside diameter of a coil, but also is able to grab the coil sleeve. So you can punch them out super easy, just like that, if it's a little bit stubborn.
That's kind of satisfying, right? I don't know, like, hey, can I punch the coil sleeves out for you?
Yeah, come on over. If you ever, we'll get these things made at some point. I had this custom made by a machinist friend of mine, and it's like invaluable and wonderful.
Hey everyone! Oh, you got a shout out from Chad Goal. Says that he misses working with you, and that you're such a wealth of information.
Thanks, Chad. I miss you too. And I hope you're still being okay in San Francisco right now. Or it's treating you okay with the pandemic, etc. So we can let this guy hang here. And then we're left with just a few pieces to the flipper assembly. We've got our end of stroke switch here, which is a normally closed end of stroke switch. Any game that uses what I'll call a mechanical flipper assembly, meaning there is a mechanical device that breaks the end of stroke switch's contact to put the hold voltage winding on, need to be shut and need to be clean. And then you've got this giant capacitor. In the 80s, Williams, another thing that they tried to do to keep service calls and bad, weak, sad flippers out of games on location was to install this capacitor, which in theory reduces the amount of arc and spark that travels across these switches. When these switches wear, there's a big arc and a flash of, it breaks 50 volts between these switches, and they get pitted and dirty. And when they get pitted and dirty, they don't make good contact, which leads to a sad flipper, which leads to someone never playing pinball again because they're all broken. So why would I want to play those things?
So would you clean it or replace it?
Yeah, I'll definitely end up replacing these things at some point. This side is broken, so it'll work without this capacitor, but in theory you might see increased wear on the end of stroke switch with these things not there. Again, if this is a home application, is it 100% necessary? Nah, but when you buy the flipper rebuild kit, you get them, you might as well use them.
Good practice. Mitchell Reader asked if we could talk about the gap on the EOS switch and how to change it.
Absolutely. We will. I'll get to that once we get the flipper back together, because that's something you want to adjust when the pawl is back in the assembly. I guess this is a good example of what the end of stroke switch does, right? So when the coil energizes with the end of stroke switch closed, the electricity that fires the solenoid is able to run through the low resistance side of the coil, which means that you'll get a very strong yanking of the flipper mechanism. But when this thing is at its end of stroke, when it reaches its maximum length, the end of stroke switch will open and you'll get a little gap. And what this gap does is it removes the path of least resistance through the coil and makes the electricity go through a high resistance side of the winding. So in theory, you'll be able to run 50 volts through the coil without melting it. If it was going through that low resistance side, it would just get really hot, burn up, and you would have a bad coil pretty quick. But we'll definitely get to adjusting this because it's super important.
Nice. And Kyle actually wrote a really awesome article about EOS switches that I am going to post on our website shortly.
Yeah, what happened to that? That was like weeks ago. You were like, hey, Kyle, write this by Friday. And I was like, okay, yeah, no problem.
I know. I gotta go. Well, I posted Steve's article first, but he did also an amazing article on...
on coils and bobbins.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what he did on, and it was beautiful. And so we're always trying to update our website with content, this type of PinTech style content.
So
okay,
in this case, I guess a little bit more about that capacitor. I'm not going to go into this because, again, I'm not an engineer. I'm not smart enough to talk about this stuff. But each end of this capacitor is attached to one end of the end of stroke switch. And but because magic and electrical engineering, it just reduces the amount of zap that happens when these things break. And these are old end of stroke switches, and they are remarkably clean. Let me see. Can the camera? The camera can kind of focus on this. I'll see if I can get a little closer.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, Rob was saying that it's so important to have the proper gap for the EOS switches. And a lot of times he sees that there's either too much or not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll really change the experience of a game having it well adjusted. Or it'll ruin your experience because it'll be broken. The end of stroke switch right here, you can, if no this pressure. Comes through, this side of the contact here is maybe, it's like a millimeter, maybe 2 millimeters thick, where the other side is maybe half that. These switches are still within acceptable working range. Again, this is going to be a home game for a while, so this will be okay. If this was going to go on location, you'd want to make sure you had big fat contacts on both sides here. Because, like I said, this side is starting to wear down a little bit, so it's maybe only a millimeter thick, where this is 2 times that. So yeah, just things to look at. But again, if it's a brand new game to you and you're going to go through all the effort of taking it apart, you should just replace all the pieces that come in your flipper rebuild kit. I know I'm not doing that right now, but this game is a long-term project, so...
Nice. And could potentially go out on location in South Carolina, right?
Oh, it definitely will one day.
We need more roller games out in the wild when it's safe. But
here is here is a flipper rebuild kit that I was able to put together today in the office. This is what you would get if you were to order a flipper rebuild kit for your Williams game. But included is a new end of stroke switch, and you could see how a brand new Switch has nice thick contacts on both sides. I know it's hard to focus on the old one. Maybe you can see this a little bit better, but yeah.
Yeah, it looks shiny.
It's much shinier than this old one, that's for sure.
It's so satisfying, like replacing the old rusted parts with shiny new ones that do, that do their job, and having the ability to do that. It's amazing because this is a 30-something-year-old game. Yeah, it is very old at this point. I mean, all pinball is very old unless you're getting brand new modern Stern games. So that's an interesting question. Tuna Delight on Twitch asked, why are there no EOS switches on some of the newer games?
Well, there are end-of-stroke switches on the newer games, but they perform a totally different function. The function in theory is the same, but in practice it's different. Again, I explained there's two different kinds of flippers. You've got a mechanical flipper, where something mechanically breaks the connection to lower the voltage running across the flipper, or through the flipper coil. But there is a more modern set of games that Data East innovated called, it's a solid-state flipper. And a solid-state flipper has a circuit in the computer, in the electronics, that will modulate the amount of power being sent through the coil after a certain amount of time. So this is like an essay question, and I think I included a bit of it in my EOS article, but let's use like the Williams or the Stern system. When the Williams or Stern games open up their small contact EOS switch, it confirms and lets the computer know it's like, hey, this opened, even though the computer is programmed to, after X amount of milliseconds, to apply a lower voltage to the coil. If you had a broken end-of-stroke switch on a newer game, such as a WPC game, any game after Addams Family, if you had a broken end-of-stroke switch, the ball could come in and hit the flipper from the top side, right? The game is like, okay, yeah, we have to apply lower voltage. It's been flipped for a while. But if the game can't see this end-of-stroke switch close again, it has no idea where the flipper is. So if you're cradling a ball or something in multi-ball, and the ball comes up and hits this flipper, and since it's on the low power side of the coil, the flipper will kind of collapse, and it won't know what to do. It wouldn't know that the flipper has changed states. So with a properly functioning modern end-of-stroke switch, as soon as the computer sees this switch close again, it re-energizes the coil and keeps the flipper up.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Anyways,
nice. That's a great explanation.
It's a essay question, and it's fun to talk about. But
we can feel your passion for EOS switches.
They're very important. Everyone will learn. This part here is called the flipper bushing. The flipper bushing is attached to the flipper base. One of mine was cracked, and there was this one here. Let me see if I can exaggerate it so you can see. This is one thing you always want to look for when rebuilding flippers. Generally, these do not come in flipper rebuild sets, but they are important to check, especially when the games are 30 years old. You see that black line? Let me see if I can get this.
Yeah, sort of. We can kind of imagine it.
There's a line running right here, and this thing's cracked. If I was able to flex this enough, you could see that it kind of opens up, and if the flipper is not absolutely solid inside of its mechanism, any bit of slop can amplify to end up being loss of power. So it's very important that when this entire bushing is flexed, when the flipper is being rotated by the crank, if that has any flex, you'll notice that in flipper power. So I only replace flipper bushings when they're broken. But again, if you are really into just going into it, doing it once, doing it all the way, you can replace them when you take the flipper apart and rebuild a flipper. Totally a best practice.
Nice.
So let's put this thing back together, and we can talk about that dreaded compression spring that these games come with, and talk about the best way to put these flippers back together. Sometimes when you are trying to slide this guy in, you will need to kind of get this gap open a little bit. these need to be clamped very tight. So it clamps around the flipper and it can't rotate inside the crank. We'll see how that works in a second. But let's talk about the expansion spring, because I can show you now a couple differences between the old style Williams flipper cranks and the new style cranks. This is an old style Williams flipper link. If you hold it up next to a new one, you can see...
Lower? Just a tad lower? Oh, perfect.
You can see a big difference in the point where it's pinned to the link. See, this one is super, super tapered, and this one is pretty wide. Does that come through okay?
Yeah, absolutely. We see what you mean.
So these tapered links are designed for these compression springs so they cannot slide off, or they'll hold a good position. Because this spring here, on the older System 11 games, this is what resets the flipper back to its resting position. This is the updated crank, or link. If you try to slide this thing on there, it does not make good contact whatsoever, and it can get all sort of wacky goofy on these things and get off center just like that. It is a common upgrade to ditch these springs on the System 11 games, use an updated flipper crank and link, and change it to the expansion spring, which is what they used on games Addams Family and onward. So the last couple games that would use these compression springs were WPC games. Games like Funhouse, games like Terminator 2, those were the last couple that used this setup. It would be the exact same as this. Starting with Addams Family is when they moved to the Fliptronic system, which was a solid-state flipper, like we talked about a minute ago.
Right.
So that's all fine and dandy, right? These new cranks are available with the spot for this spring attaches. A lot of these bases were drilled for a spring like this, so you could attach them. So it's an easy upgrade. So why is there a stipulation about should I do this or should I not do this? What I said about this being a mechanical flipper linkage, this has 50 volts running across it at all times. And when this moves over here to open it, it breaks that connection. You run into a problem, which is rare, but it is something to absolutely be wary of. If you don't have an insulator on the switch actuator, this guy here that comes out at 90 degrees, this will be live, right? So this thing is installed like this. It goes in here like this.
Right.
And it has 50 volts on it now. And what is this touching? This is supposed to be isolated with the coil sleeve, but 50 volts can go to here, which can go to here, which makes this live, and anything touching this could introduce a short, or adding 50 volts to where it should not go. It's something you need to be wary of when swapping these things over, is make sure that you have good insulation here to not turn this live. I've seen people do this swap over on older games that maybe have a lane change switch on this switch stack. So games like Firepower and Blackout or something like that, where the switch that was there to change the light on the top rollovers was actually a switch here on the top of the stack, which was part of the switch matrix. And if you introduce 50 volts to the switch matrix, you have exploding components, and it's really sad and annoying. So if you do this, make sure just keep it in mind. Be wary of it. It's not hard to do. It is a good practice to do it, but keep it in mind.
And another just friendly reminders: make sure your game's turned off and unplugged from the power source.
Be
Better safe than sorry.
Don't zap yourself.
Kyle, can you talk about how to deal with the screws that have snapped off inside of the flipper bracket? Because apparently that's a common thing that happens.
It's a very common thing, and it's really annoying. So
what do?
Sometimes you can get them out, and sometimes you can't. Honestly, at this time when we have these flipper bases available for so cheap, it's almost not worth it to try to do it and just replace the flipper base. In times when I've been working on location and I need to get them out because I don't have any more flipper bases in my kit, you can get crafty. Sometimes you can use vice grips if there's anything protruding above this hole.
Netroomer said.
You could grab it with a vice grip and try to twist it out. I've used a Dremel in desperation and cut a slot in it and then used a flathead screwdriver to take them out. Yeah, I think it's best, you know, it is good to have a left and a right flipper plate on hand just in case, especially if you work on multiple games that use the same flippers. But yeah, there's also easy outs. I've had mixed experience with easy outs, which is a drill bit that goes in one direction and then you could reverse it and it tries to pull the screw out. But you know, these are kind of cheap, and sometimes it's more worth my time just to replace it than it is to try to extract these things, especially when I'm charging by the hour. I can always bring the bases back to the shop, get them out, and reuse them. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, there you go. That was a great explanation.
So, we can kind of work on getting this thing back together. So what I did is we put the flipper in through the top and put it into the bushing. We can then reinsert the crank, reinsert the flipper shaft through the crank, and we can work on getting the rest of the flipper back together before we work on the adjustments like the end play on the flipper, making sure the flipper is in a good spot on the play field, so the angle is correct with the in-lane guides, and also getting the end of stroke gap correct. So what we'll do now is I'll grab this flipper coil, make sure it's not too twisted, get it back in, make sure the coil sleeve is fully inserted into the coil and sitting flush with the back so it can protrude just a teeny bit through the front here. We're going to get our coil stop, insert it into the back here. Is any of that visible? Sort of.
Yeah, it looks great. It still blows my mind. I don't know why it does, but just the swapping of, or the turning the coil upside down or right side up, or the opposite way.
It took me when I was like a super novice
such
to
a
this.
Great idea.
I had such a rudimentary understanding of electronics and what all this stuff was, and I was like, I always tried to install the coils the same way I took them out because I didn't want to install it backwards.
Yeah.
And then I realized, though, it's like there really is no backwards because you're just turning on a magnet. That was a long time ago, and since I've tried to learn more about electronic principles, but that's a basic one. Magnets are confusing, but don't overcomplicate it.
Kyle, would you like a hand-delivered bite of nachos?
I think. Yes, maybe. Who's asking?
It depends who's delivering it, but yes, in this scenario, yes.
I do love some nachos.
We're going to turn this into a pinball.
When you are tightening these things down, what I'll recommend generally is... oh, do you have food?
It's nacho time.
Oh, okay, hold on. I'm getting some lunch.
His awesome wife, Eska, is giving him a bite. We've been at it all day long. Nice, thank you. I didn't get any, but that's okay.
Wow. Those are super good. I'm jealous now. Either way, when I'm installing these guys here, you want to make sure that the coil stop bracket doesn't get twisted. Get both of your screws inserted and start them. Once they're started and you get this thing all square, then you can go in and crank them down and get them tight. These are components that really need to be installed tightly. If you have loose screws back here, they can get loose and fall out. They can wiggle around and you could shear them off. It's just, again, it's important to have them tight. So we'll go in here and, again, we don't need to get a torque wrench and set them to exactly 68 foot-pounds or something. Just get them real dang tight, and you'll be good. Go in there, use two hands, nice and tight.
Ooh,
excellent.
Really great.
I can put these away. And now what we have is a
what
super
about the
loose...
wire that's like now kind of dangling since you flipped it? Do you tack that down, or do you just kind of let it sit?
The wires coming off of the coil?
Right.
Just make sure that they cannot interfere with anything that moves.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're okay in this position. These wires are pretty stiff. But, you know, if they were super long and flopping over here, you'd have a problem. But otherwise, no, these are totally okay the way they are.
Cool.
So now what I can do is we will install our expansion spring here.
Rip Shill on Twitch just said, man, I wish you had this stream a few months ago when I had to do a rebuild on Metallica.
We'll get into some Stern stuff. I would really, once we have the time and the resources, it would be really awesome to do a best practices flipper rebuild on every flipper. They're all kind of the same, but they all have just a little bit of intricacies to them that can make them different.
And just as a reminder, today is System 11 flippers.
Yep. These are very similar to WPC flippers, but yeah, we'll do one for each. The Stern flipper is really slick. They're really easy and awesome to work with. Anyways, we've got this tight. We've got the return spring installed. But if we could move the camera, we would see we have a very floppy flipper. This one is facing this way. That one's facing this way. So I'm going to try to kind of have to do this with the camera in one spot, but we'll see what we can get. What I like to do at this point is I'll try to kind of hold the flipper where it sort of needs to go. And again, this is the lane guide here, leading towards the out lane. I have the flipper bat held, you know, at this angle. You want to kind of keep it in the ballpark. We can still we'll tighten this down so it doesn't flop when I drop it. So we'll do that now. Get in here.
So you're literally holding the flipper in position with your hand on the other side of the playfield.
Yes. We'll get this tight so when I let go of the flipper, it does not flop, which is now. This is the position I always screw myself over in. You get it here, and then the wrench slips, and you bash your thumbnail right there.
Oh, no.
And it's not fun.
I think that happens to you a lot, because this is the second time you've mentioned it.
Yeah. Here, Kyle's pro tip. I've been doing this long enough to say, don't do that. Okay, I'm going to see if I can move this wacky tripod rig so we can kind of see what's going on in the front. I think the microphone might be okay enough to move that box out of the game now, so if the audio becomes really crummy in a second, let me know.
Yeah, we can do a little adjustment. Tater Salad said their nickname in college was Floppy Flipper.
Oh, you don't want that nickname, do you? Maybe.
I hope you liked having that. My flipper's floppy.
Bear with me while I set up a second shot. Right. So here's what we have now.
Ooh, look how pretty.
Yeah, it matches. It's almost in the right spot. What we need to look for here is the worst thing for a flipper to have is bounce. We want to make sure, and we'll have to fine adjust these. When you do these things, it takes a lot of adjustment when you shop a game out to get it to play well. Play adjusting almost takes as much time as doing all the work. What we want to avoid is a ball coming down this, let me back up a little. We want the ball to avoid coming down this lane guide and having a hop before it gets to the flipper. It's super unsatisfying and very, very enraging when that ball hops a little and you can, you'll miss your orbit shot or something like that. The goal is to try to get this to be the smoothest transition as possible. A lot of people ask what these holes in the playfield are, if these are visible at all.
Yes.
These are roll pins. So when these playfields were set up on the factory assembly line, these roll pins were sticking up and out of the playfield. And what the factory workers would do is line the flippers up to be resting, having this bottom leading edge, the wide edge of the flipper, resting against this roll pin, tighten it down, bring it up, and slam these roll pins down into the playfield. So now, when we adjust these things, we need to think of it as, trying to get it in that spot. It'll get us in a really close spot. So what I'm going to do, it's tight enough to not slip in the crank, but I can still rotate it a teeny bit. So what I'm going to do, I'll exaggerate it, right? I'm going to move it a lot. And now you see how it can't, I've only got, this is unsatisfactory.
Yeah, that doesn't look fun.
It's not a fun way to play roller games. But what we can do is try to move this thing just enough to get it almost in line with that wider bit on the bottom of the flipper bat to line up with the edge of that roll pin. And that puts us in the ballpark. It's not ideal, but it's better than guessing 10 times.
Nice.
So we'll get this guy up.
Look how pro you are. You're the camera operator and the pinball technician.
I've learned a lot of things in the past couple months. It's awesome. Let me get this tripod back in the game.
I was going to ask that too. I don't think we've gotten to that point yet, but what about flipper gauges and how to use those?
Yeah, let's use one. I haven't used a flipper gauge in a really long time, but this is another very important adjustment in a flipper. And it's actually kind of adjusted perfect right now. What we're looking for, again, if we were looking, let me get parts, maybe this will help us.
Why wouldn't you use a flipper gauge? So these actually come with our flipper rebuild kits.
I don't want to say it. I mean, I don't. I'm not saying this to make me. I've done it and I can do it by feel. I don't need the flipper gauge to do it every time now. But you absolutely need to pay attention to this adjustment. It's super important. So we'll take the flipper base out. But this is how the flipper sits through the playfield. It sits in its bushing, and we have the crank, which attaches down here. Now, what we're shooting for is some end play. I'm trying to get this rotated right so it shows up good. We need to get a little bit of distance between the bushing and the crank arm. If this thing is all sandwiched together super tight, it's going to bind. You're not going to get snappy flippers. It's going to rob power. You're going to break your flipper bushings. It's all around bad. What we're shooting for is about a credit card's thickness between the flipper bushing and this crank. So, when you get your flipper rebuild kit from us, or if you're lucky enough to have a game that never had the goodie bag taken apart, this is what we modeled it after. Williams supplied you with this little feeler gauge. And what this is designed to do,
I love those things,
is to assist you in setting that gap while you're tightening the flipper down. You can slide it in between the crank and the bushing, like that, and that will ensure once you have everything cranked down that you have a little bit of free play, so you won't have any binding flippers.
Nice.
If you're doing this without a flipper rebuild kit that we've sold, or you lost your flipper gauge or something like that, the goal is to try to get just about a credit card's thickness of play. If you have too much slop, that's going to affect, the angle of this, and you'll get the same bad performance. If you have just a little bit of movement, let's see if this kind of comes through. If you have just a little bit of slop like that, and you can see this thing move in and out just a teeny bit, you've done it right.
Where would you put that? This is a really noob question, but you showed us how to do it on the flipper you were just holding, but where do I actually put the flipper gauge on the game?
No, let's use it. So what we're going to do, again, remember, the final step of putting this thing back together, once we have the coil stop back in, we have the flipper bat kind of adjusted where it needs to go. The final step is to crank this sucker down to really grip the shaft of the flipper. Well, the point we'd be using this is now. We'll stick this guy in, find the area between the bushing and the crank, and it slid right in without any play. So, man, I was really lucky. I got it right without even checking. But
professional.
You'll stick this sucker in like that. But the nice thing is even though I don't use the flipper gauge all the time, sometimes when you crank this thing down, it shifts, and then you need to adjust it 3 or 4 times. The nice thing about using this gauge is it will guarantee when you're sitting here cranking and torquing the crank around the shaft, it won't move. It can't. There's something in the way, right?
Nice.
So you'd insert it like this, and I'm going to try very hard not to destroy my thumbnail. This is a very important place to use a lot of strength. This needs to be tight. If this isn't tight, the torque of this flipping, the shaft will start to rotate in the crank arm, or the pawl, and you do not want that. So for now, We will crank it down kind of tight, because again, the next step in our whole rebuild process, once we get everything on, is we're play testing. We need to make sure all the shots work, and we were going to kind of do that a little bit today. So I'll make it nice and tight, but it's not going to be the final position. I guarantee you I'll have to adjust this thing 2 or 3 more times to eliminate all that ball hop I was talking about. So, yeah.
Lots of up and down.
Yeah, and imagine now if you had to do 3 or 4 of those at one time. It's a lot of top, bottom, top, bottom. So yeah, now we've got a flipper that's put back together and adjusted. The last thing, and most important thing, is absolutely this end of stroke switch. I'm going to try to get this thing in as close as possible. I might even take it off the stand if we can't see this.
Actually, maybe you can lower the stand and then tilt up.
Yep, there we go.
Hey.
Do we have light on this end of stroke switch? Can we see?
Yes. You can probably drop a light down to get a little bit. We see it. Everyone sees it there, right? Look at my mouse.
I'm moving another light closer so we can just like really blow this thing out with light. Is it better now? Oh yeah. That looks better. At least we can see the gap.
Right.
Okay, so like I said, now when you flip it and it reaches its end of stroke, it needs to break the contact on this switch. Okay. If this switch never opened, we'd be sending 50 volts through the low resistance side of this coil, and it would get really hot, it would melt, and you'd be really sad. The goal is to have this end of stroke switch break about 1/8 of an inch right at the end of stroke. So this is opening a little early. That's a kind of a wide gap. I want to make sure that we adjust that maybe just a teeny bit smaller. An important thing that we is maybe outside the scope of this video right now, but is also adjusting this switch for what is called wipe. And that is when a switch opens and closes, it kind of has an action like this. When a switch can kind of wipe itself clean, that really prolongs the life of the switch. But let's see if we can get that thing adjusted to a better place. Take a handy dandy switch adjuster tool. Again, make sure the game is off.
Yes.
We're going to adjust the stay piece of the flipper switch, or the end of stroke switch, which is this angled piece at the top. This is like micro adjustments. So I'm going to give it just a push, and we're going to go back and check. When you're checking for end of stroke performance, don't push it by the link, don't push it by here, push it by the actual flipper plunger. The plunger will give you the most accurate real world condition to check this measurement, right? When this thing magnetizes, it pulls on the plunger, right? If you have a bunch of worn out, if your link is really worn out, which is common, and you push from here, you might get a unsatisfactory result. These are fresh flipper components, so I can push it from anywhere. But if you've got an older game, a game you just bought, a game you're trying to get working, push it from here. Let me see if I can prove that really quick. So take a look at this. This is an old flipper crank. If I were to hold this steady and try to move the top, do you see that teeny bit of play right there?
Yeah.
When you're adjusting this switch to open 1/8 of an inch, just a teeny bit, losing out on that play could really make a difference. It seems trivial. It's just another best practice I learned from an old timer. Check it from here, not from here.
Nice. Every millimeter counts when you're talking about
there's a lot of wear points on flippers. You can get worn out areas between this area and the link, and you could get slop there. You get a lot of slop here always. That is always a place where you'll start to lose power. And again, when these things are being pulled like that, any bit of slop that this thing needs to make up before it actually starts moving the flipper is a lot of reduced power when the flipper is going to smack the ball.
Nice.
Does that make sense? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, that made so much sense. We're all captivated.
Okay, cool. in that case, let's see how that adjustment turned out. It really didn't make too much of a difference. I want to move it in just a teeny bit more. This is something you absolutely have to do every time you rebuild your flippers or change your end of stroke switch. You know, there's no way to pre-gap any of this stuff. Every time you change a switch, whether it's a playfield switch, a relay switch, an end of stroke switch, they all need to be checked for proper function before you turn it on, right? And start using it in its intended application.
And so when you're making the gap bigger, I noticed you're not like pulling, but you're kind of, it looks almost like you're twisting the switch.
Yeah, the switch adjuster. Because what we're doing is we're trying to get this to push down against the bottom blade more. So that being, when this thing reaches the bottom blade, it only has to open a teeny bit. What we're seeing here, though, this is a very fine gap. This is like hot rod performance end of stroke gap. You know, this thing's going to be running on the edge of its life until it decides to stop opening that much, and then it burns out the coil. For extended performance, I'd want to make sure that that's just a little bit wider. So again, if we start getting slop here and here, or the switch contacts start to wear down, this, you know, maybe 1/16 of an inch gap here could really turn into nothing when this stuff starts to wear out. So that's why the 1/8 inch adjustment is kind of important. It will allow for the flippers to wear just a teeny bit and not fry your flipper coil. And that's okay. It's a little bit bigger. Important. I'd like to be able to adjust it for a little more wipe, but I can try to do that off camera and then give an we can do an amendment video of adjusting these things next time, or maybe on the next game we work on. But that's it. Again,
I never realized those EOS switches were so vital to everything, right? I mean,
it's vital to keeping the game working long. And,
hi, Debbie.
And this one's actually really bad over here. It's, again, that kind of hot rod performance level of running on the edge of performance. So I'm going to adjust this one. It's only opening like just a crack. So I'm going to work on moving this thing up just a teeny bit so we can turn the game on and hit the ball around just a teeny bit. The other thing, when you're adjusting these switches, you really need to make sure that they're nice and tight together. Again, this is what allows that 50 volts to run through the low resistance side of the coil. If that is, if they're loose or they're not making great contact, you'll have poor flipper performance. Or if they're dirty, dirty, crusty switch is going to act just like a poorly adjusted switch.
Oh yeah, and if anyone wasn't around for our episode last week where we gave some pin tips on how to clean your EOS switches, why don't you tell them again, Kyle, our few different options of cleaning the contacts of those switches?
There's a lot of opinions and different ways of how to clean these things. With a new switch that has bright, shiny, wear-resistant tungsten contacts, you want to make sure you do not use something too hard to break that tungsten layer. The tungsten will improve the life of the switch a lot, but it's brittle and can break. You've got a couple options, like I've got this handy-dandy Plastone, which is a pliable but slightly abrasive file that will take off dirt. You've got a traditional points file, which is a metal file that is, very abrasive. Or some people will use the business card method, which is great. It's not the ideal method to clean an end of stroke switch because it doesn't have enough bite. I mentioned earlier that sometimes when these things spend a lot of time breaking and they're arcing a lot, they can build pits. And the pits in the end of stroke switch will not allow them to sit nice and flush together. You'll have a big broken empty spot where there's a pit from constant arcing. So sometimes you'll be able to file these guys down using this switch in desperation, but this is something you definitely should keep in your kit if you've got more than one pinball game. You're going to want to make sure you have good quality end of stroke switches at all times. But since this is an old nasty switch and it'll probably be replaced one day, what I'll do, let me see if I can adjust this. kind of seeing it. Let me move this light closer again.
Whee! Lighting.
What I'll do is I'm going to use this big hard file just for dramatic effect. Yeah, those are pretty grody actually. But what we can do is we can put this this file in here, and I try to pinch the contacts together, and then using my forefinger and thumb, pinch it together with your two hands, and then just pull. And you will take off and start getting these things shiny. The shinier something is, the more current it will conduct, because magic and electrical principles. But yeah, that's one good way to clean these switches. They're hard. These are made out of a harder material than this thing, so they're hard to file. When in doubt, replace it. They're not expensive, and the performance they gain you is worth the expense.
Nice. And you always like to just go one way. Like, I'm not trying to get in there with a file and go like I'm brushing teeth, right?
No, I mean, because you don't want to rub it raw. You don't really want to get it you don't really want to file it super, super hard. I mean, sometimes if it's a grody thing and I'm just trying to see where the game is to make it work, and if everything's off, you can get this in here and file it like that. Or, sorry, working on the wrong flipper now.
Thank you.
You can get in there and kind of do this sort of an action just to see where you're at, but, you know, when in doubt, replace them. They're negligible in cost. It's worth your time.
All right.
One thing to keep in mind, again, we were talking about mechanical action flippers. If you have a WPC game, if you have a Stern game, if you have a Sega game, a later Sega game, do not file those end of stroke switches. They do not carry big contact. That is the kind of switch you would want to use a business card, or heck, even use your finger. Your finger is rough enough to take that dirt off.
Wow.
The new switches do not need to be filed, and you will not have the same sort of issues you'll have with these guys.
Big warning. Yeah.
Yeah, I could talk about this for 1,000 hours, so it's kind of, I feel like I'm being rushed with our time constraint, but I'm glad we got some, information on these things down. So.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think I did this lower or upper flipper too. That thing's adjusted right. So sometimes on games too, I'm trying to think I have a meteor, and the distance between the flipper on meteor and the drop targets is like 3 inches, right? I'm exaggerating a bit, but one thing you could do is to make that coil weaker, since you don't have a lot of power options like you do with WPC, you can artificially adjust these end of stroke switches to open way earlier. You could push this switch in very far, and it will break contact on the end of stroke switch much earlier, thus reducing the amount of power the flipper can transfer to the ball. Especially on games like Meteor, where the flipper is close to those drop targets, you'll break them all the time. I know Stern back in the early 80s put out a retrofit thing that put like a gigantic resistor across the leads of the coil to lower the power. But what I'll do a lot of the time is just adjust the end of stroke switch poorly so you can get a weaker flip out of it.
Makes sense.
Pro tip.
That's awesome. That's great. Pin tip, pro tip.
Yeah,
Okay.
Let's what are we doing on time? Are we doing okay?
No, we're doing great. We're gonna try to extend this. We're not gonna cut off at the hour because we still have a lot of stuff we want to show y'all. So we're gonna go at least for another half hour.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's see what we can get up here, because since last time I have completed rubbering the top side of the playfield.
Yay!
And what I wanted to do really quick is we would be able to, since everything is off, we'll be able to adjust lane guides. These guys here. While we have access to these things, if they're feeding poorly, or you feel like you're cheated off because, oh, I made a pretty crummy shot up this orbit, and it comes dribbling down and the ball goes right down the middle, now is the time that you can kind of fudge that stuff and adjust the guides a teeny bit. The big one on a lot of these Steve Ritchie games, especially like the cross playfield ball launch, like high speeds, etc. They actually give you a big slot. If this that's coming through.
Yeah.
You've got a big slot right here to adjust this thing in and out to be able to adjust the firing path. But
very cool.
Yeah, let's fire this thing up. I'll adjust the camera and we could work on that.
Once you adjust the camera and get settled, we have a really long question from Wayne. Hi, Wayne. He says, help. I've had a 1990s Williams Funhouse pinball for 10 years. I love that game. Hey, bucko. And whoever had it before me replaced the leaf switches used for the right and left flippers with cherry-type micro switches.
Whoa.
And no capacitors attached to them. Whenever someone obtains a new high score, they're not able to enter their initials, as pressing either of the flipper buttons come time to enter your initials has no effect. Any suggestions? Anyone? He's asking the chat as well, too, but Kyle, I figured this was a good time to...
Well, I think...
Maybe give him a tip?
I think Funhouse is one of those games that... I don't think it has dedicated lane adjust flipper or lane change flippers. I think that has programming in it that allows it to, when it sees a flipper input, it does something. First things first, it's almost not worth troubleshooting until you revert it to stock. Make it work the way it's supposed to. I haven't worked on a Funhouse in a really long time, but that doesn't sound right at all.
Wayne, shoot us an email.
Yeah, shoot us an email. Send me a picture, and I could try to figure that out for you.
What's the best email address for him to send it to, Kyle? What's the easiest one we can get?
You could send it to sales@marcopinball.com.
All right. And NetReamer also mentioned that we might have misstated earlier. Sorry, my dad's getting ice. That I'm hanging out with my parents, y'all. That we misstated earlier that saying the EOS switches on newer games were normally closed, but they are in fact normally open.
Yeah, well,
I think we should.
I don't think I stated that specifically, but again, that's what turns into stroke switches into an essay question, because normally closed, normally open. But yes, on the newer games, they're normally open. I think maybe he's referring to or he or she was referring to when I was speaking about the modern games and not knowing the switch changing states. But yeah, no, absolutely. The Williams and new Stern games also use open end of stroke switches.
Thanks, Rob. I'll let him know. Nice.
Let's see here. This game is Sans Coin Door currently. So
it is almost Father's Day. Ooh.
Let me turn the volume down on this thing so it's not super obnoxious. And what we're gonna do...
Oh, Dan Forden is never obnoxious. They have the best sound and music for roller games.
No, it's wonderful. I just don't want to have to scream over it. Oh, we need to put flipper rubbers on these naked flippers.
Yeah, they've been naked for so long. Even in our promo picture, they were naked, and I was thinking of drawing them, so they would be more appropriate. But
since I'm still kind of working on it, I'm just going to use some used flipper rubbers that I have laying around.
Give us a little tilt down so we can watch this how to rubber your flippers part.
Yeah, sometimes I forget because this is so second nature, but there's some best practices.
Yes.
Flipper rubbers, this one doesn't. Let me see if I can find one that has writing on it. Here we go. So this one, in a teeny text, right here, it says PRW. That's great and all, but this side says nothing. And sometimes I'm really anal about pinball games. I like to install it so you can't see any of the wording or the sizing on one side of the rubber. I like to install them facing down. When I install a flipper rubber, generally I'll install it from the back, and I will try to get the back of the rubber to butt up against the wider bit on the bottom of the flipper, stretch it out over the front, and then sometimes people will just stop there. It is actually pretty important to go in here and make sure that this flipper rubber is seated all the way down in its shaft, or on the, around the molding. Let me get,
okay.
Where's a bummer flipper? One of my busted ones. Here we go. So you can see on this guy, you've got the wider bit of the flipper here, the channel where the rubber...
Oh, can you go up a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. Where the rubber kind of sinks into. Let me move this light also.
And let's talk about PRW rubbers as well. Why did you go with those?
That is our brand of rubber, unlike the
Good stuff.
polyurethane like super bands or something like that. I like the feeling of the original rubber on this game. I'm going to go with original rubber, and we formulated a really good compromise between playability and bounce and longevity, and I've been using them for a long time. Even before I started working here, they're my favorite. But what we have here is we need to make sure that we don't install the flipper rubber something like this maybe. This can cause the ball to do all sorts of weird things. I mean, we dig down into the playfield, bounce up. You want to make sure...
Sorry, bro.
Sorry.
Thanks.
See how it's kind of coming up at an angle like that?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that these things are installed down around that groove. Get it as low as possible so you've got a nice straight in line with the bottom centering line as possible. This is a really old, nasty piece of rubber. You see it splitting.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, it's grody.
It was time to replace them.
Absolutely. So we've got rubber. We've got balls in the game.
Excellent.
Let's work on some basic, just checking out and seeing if some of these shots feel good. You don't need to do this with the game on, but it's kind of fun to sometimes. We'll just do a basic check first of like the shooter, right? We can't do a total test. Generally, again, I like to do these sorts of things when the ramps are off and it gives me time to adjust. Unfortunately, you can't really adjust the main shooter shot because in this game, when you shoot this shot, it goes up and around the ramp. So we'd kind of be doing nothing. But we can take that ball and we could do by hand and just kind of make some of the basic shots and watch the performance. Make sure that rubbers are in the right spot and they're bouncy and there's no way the ball can get hung up on things. But it's more fun to do that with the flippers on, right? So let's start the game.
Yeah. Oh, but we have such an unsatisfying view right now.
I know, I'm sorry. Here, I can kind of put it in front of me.
We're getting more cameras and more angles, everyone, so we'll be doing a little nice switching around. Oh, your room looks so clean right now.
Oh, goodness. All right, here it comes.
Oh, are you one-handing it? Oh my gosh. He's doing some fancy camera tricks right now.
Yeah, and y'all can see the back of my head with the other camera. It's great.
Yep.
My long quarantine haircut. So that kind of works. I guess let me put it closer because we're really going to be focusing on these shots here, the way that these guys, the orbits flow. So.
I'm not going to give that pro tip.
Oh wow, this thing's super loud still.
True story, bro.
Let me do this really quick. We're going to unplug the sound.
No. You're unplugging the sound?
We're unplugging the sound, but that's the pot. I think that's the speakers. Let me double check on camera so I don't blow it up on camera.
Yes, Michael Yan on Facebook. Deadflip has a superior streaming setup. Everything we've ever learned about streaming has come from Deadflip, and we are not quite as advanced as him, but we have goals.
Jack is the inspiration for a lot of this, taking what I'm good at, which is fixing things, and trying to do something similar. Because it'll be great when we start playing pinball and y'all can watch and see how terrible I am at it.
Oh, that's a nice tip from NetReamer on YouTube. Thanks again. I really love all the tips everyone's giving us in the chat too. It makes it so much more of like a fun community time right now. But he said that note that the Gottlieb flipper bats have a narrow space for rubber and requires a narrower rubber than other games.
Yep.
And installing a too wide rubber will cause a playfield wear as well as the ball is pushed down.
Yeah,
so,
you see them. You see that all the time between both games, right? You'll see Gottlieb rubbers on Williams or Bally games, and you'll see Williams rubbers on Gottlieb games. But yeah, the Gottlieb rubbers are the same width. No, well, they're the same length. They're 2.5 inch or 1.5 inches, but the Williams rubbers are a half-inch tall, and the Gottlieb rubbers are 3/8 of an inch tall. So make sure you get the right rubbers.
How frustrating.
Let's see. What?
That's a good question. Magic Ditto on Twitch wants to know if we're planning on streaming backglass repair. That's kind of like a restoration thing, perhaps beyond the scope of this series.
I have done backglass repair and backglass sealing, etc. before. It's not the most interesting content, just because it's very...
Yeah, but it's important to know. It's important to know,
and maybe we could work on it. Yeah, I mean, that's something to consider. I've got a really crummy Grand Prix. I've got a crummy Grand Prix backglass right here that we can try to do some work on. I've got a nicer one I'm going to swap on it, so maybe that would be a good candidate. This thing's real angry that I'm not playing the game. Okay.
Maybe we'll do it next week. Who knows?
Let's see if we can hit that left orbit.
Yeah, we do need a pinball art restoration series. It's in the works.
I can't hit anything.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Let's not have that go flying all over the place.
Oh, my gosh.
That would actually be really fun.
He's playing with the glass off. Right now, we are checking the lane guides. And if Kyle could aim properly, then we would check these really fast. You got this, Kyle. We can't see your flippers, but it's okay.
It's the thing about being under pressure or something.
Oh, look at that. That seemed
smooth.
That
was nice because it came like straight back to the right
master flow style orbit.
Come on. Can I do something fancy on camera? No, okay. We'll try to hit that one more time. It's always good to get it to go around a few times.
Okay. Seems to be nice.
So yeah, that feels good. It's coming right back where we want it. It's not giving us an unfair straight down the middle or kind of coming back to the flipper sort of thing. Let me see while I'm on this flipper if I can hit this shot. And we'll kind of go up and around that inner horseshoe. All those things feel good. It didn't feel too clunky. It doesn't feel like anything needs to be messed with that much. It's kind of a clunky shot in its geometry to begin with because it makes this like gradual curve and then bounces around. But
so needless to say, it was a successful flipper bat swap today.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, unless the coil's like melting up right now or something. But the way to test, you can always test by. Let's see. If you flip it,
says, their aim, as in every technician's, gets worse the more people are watching. No practice now. Oh yeah, here we go. See, we'll have an awesome playfield camera next time around, y'all. Because it's like, we're like, oh, where did it go? Before we were like, oh, when is he going to hit it? Now there's no way to just, let's move on.
Let's move on.
So, all right, so we checked out the lane guides. We swapped the flippers. I think that's pretty much it for what we wanted to do today. And then, right, is there anything else you wanted to say before we go into our little special announcement and fun time?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
When in doubt, ask questions, always. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yes. So now I wanted to show everyone knows about the new latest Stern release, which I am personally super, super, super excited about. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So since we're all here hanging out, let's watch the trailer. Kyle hasn't even watched it yet.
I know, I feel bad.
All right, and
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Heroes in a half shell.
They're the world's most fearsome fighting team.
We really hit.
They're heroes in the half shell and they're green.
Hey, get a grip.
When the evil shredder attacks, these turtle boys don't cut up no slack. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Heroes in a half shell.
Turtle power.
so that was awesome.
That's pretty cool. That was really neat.
Oh, I made a cool splash screen for us, but we are. Let me put my screen on because I was like, yay! Look at it! Wait, look at it! Yeah! So
That's cute.
Needless to say, we are taking orders for if you wanted to order this game. We will help you get one. So send us an email at gamesellers@marcopinball.com. And this game was designed by John Borg, and the beautiful art. I really want to see this again. Let me throw this up. The beautiful art by
Zombie Yeti did the art, right?
Yes, Zombie Yeti did the art.
It's incredible.
The engineer was Elliot Eisman. Sound, of course, is very important. And then the two animations are
excited. I mean, the shots look satisfying, and I really think that center ramp feature with the diverter is really exciting. It looks fun. I like the way the ramps kind of go from like up and then down and then back to you. They look very satisfying to hit. I like 3 flipper games a lot. I'm really excited to shoot using a left flipper. It's really fun. I'm excited to hear it.
A lot of people have said that it reminds them of kind of Baywatch sort of thing, and you have played a lot of Baywatch. What do you feel? How do you feel about it?
I don't know. I haven't played it yet, so I really can't give any sort of a constructive opinion.
I have 2 of you right now. Sorry, I'm managing too much right now. But my special announcement is we get to do an episode where we unbox a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Pro. So we're going to show everyone the Marco way of unboxing a new Stern game, which we have a lot of experience with since we used to bring 50 or so to all the shows.
So many.
And some tips, some etiquette, and then we get to play it. So we're really, really excited for that. It should be, later in June, because they're making them now. But stay tuned. We will keep you guys posted on all that. And what's better than 1 Kyle? 2 Kyles.
I mean, I'd get a lot more work done if there were multiple of me. I don't know if the world could handle 2 of me, though.
Oh, yeah. And if you guys want to get in on it, each Project Pinball Charity is going to be raffling one. So you just pay $50. You can join into their raffle. The money goes to a very great cause. And maybe we'll do a raffle ticket.
Yeah.
So what if y'all can win a raffle ticket from us and then we'll buy your raffle ticket, and then you might win a pinball machine.
Raffleception.
There's so much exciting things going around the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's a long name. TMNT. Is that how I should say it? TMNT.
Longhand. It's a little more exciting. It just looks good. It's a great design team, and I'm really excited to see the animations. I mean, Stern's really been knocking it out of the park with LCD content.
The animations look really cool.
I know they've been hiring a lot of visual artists, and their art team right now is just incredible. Jeremy Packer, Zombie Yeti, does some great, colorful. They're just so appealing to look at. You're just I want to play that. Look at all the color.
Oh my gosh.
It's gonna be cool.
And man, the art animations on Jurassic Park and Stranger Things, and then now Turtles. Even Deadpool was super awesome.
Deadpool's still my favorite. I
love the big LCD screens with all the animations on it, because I'm a huge video gamer, and I'm it's a fusion of both. It's so great. What does everyone in the chat think about it? Would Baywatch without dolphin sound be good? Right. We're coming back over here. Thank you, everybody. for a great show today. We had so much fun hanging out with all of you. Thanks for participating in the chat and for watching Kyle do his thing and geek out about EOS switches for an hour.
Thanks for listening to me talk.
And please remember to subscribe and follow us. If you hit the little bell on the top of whichever service you're watching us on, whether it be Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube, you'll get a notification when we go live. So there you have it. Yeah.
And we've been going live, doing a little bit of after hours, chit chat and pinball talking too. So if you ever want to get in on that, there's no schedule. My God, just got to wait for that notification to come up.
Yep. So if you want more information or you have a fun idea for our show, send us an email at marcotv@marcopinball.com. And until then, see you all next Thursday.